The Lee mansion was unusually quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was Anne's wedding day, yet there were no smiles, no joyous celebrations. Instead, the atmosphere was weighed down by regret, bitterness, and desperation. Inside Anne's room, Mrs. Lee paced back and forth, her hands trembling as she tried to reason with her daughter. "Mrs. Lee, Anne, please, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "You don't have to do this. Run away. We can figure something out. This marriage, it's not right for you." Anne, sitting calmly in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate lace veil atop her head, didn't even flinch. Her expression remained stoic, almost unnervingly serene, as if her mother's words were nothing more than background noise. "Anne, are you done?" she asked coldly, turning to face her mother with an arched brow. "Mrs. Lee, done," she cried, her eyes glistening with tears. "Anne, I am begging you. This isn't love. This is a trap. Taehyung, he's dangerous. You know what he did to Jiha. How can you willingly walk into this? You're my daughter. I can't let this happen to you." Anne rose from her chair, smoothing out the intricate details of her white gown. The diamonds on her necklace shimmered under the chandelier's glow, but her face was devoid of emotion. "Anne, your daughter," she repeated mockingly, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "Since when, Iyama? Since when have I been your daughter? Was it when you promised Taehyung to Jiha without caring about my feelings? Or when you stood by and let her steal the man I loved? Tell me, Iyama, when did I ever matter to you?" Mrs. Lee stumbled back as if Anne's words had physically struck her. "Mrs. Lee, Anne, you don't understand. We were under pressure. Sohashi manipulated me, and I didn't have a choice. I was trying to protect this family." Anne laughed dryly, shaking her head. "Anne, protect the family or protect yourself. Don't justify your selfishness by calling it protection. You chose Jiha over me back then, and now you want me to run away because you're suddenly afraid. How convenient, Iyama." At that moment, Mr. Lee entered the room, his face stern, but his eyes flickering with guilt. "Mr. Lee, Anne, enough," he said firmly. "You're crossing the line. Let's go. I'll walk you down the aisle." Anne turned to him, her gaze icy. "Anne, walk me down the aisle," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think I need you for that? After years of neglect and fake concern, you suddenly want to play the doting father. Spare me the act, Mr. Lee." Mr. Lee's face turned red with anger, but he said nothing.
Anne, I'll go myself," she said firmly, brushing past him. Mrs. Lee grabbed her arm desperately. "Mrs. Lee, Anne, please, don't do this. I'll do anything, just don't marry him. He'll ruin you, just like he ruined Jiha." Anne turned to face her mother, her expression unyielding. "Anne, you already ruined me once, Yama," she said softly but with venom in her tone. "You snatched him away from me before, but I won't let that happen again. Not this time. This time, he's mine. And nothing you say or do will change that."
With that, Anne pulled her arm free and walked out of the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor with every determined step. Mrs. Lee turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Lee, stop her," she cried. "Do something." But Mr. Lee remained frozen, guilt and anger warring on his face.
Meanwhile, Anne made her way to the grand doors of the mansion. Her heart was pounding, but her steps didn't falter. She paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. "Anne, you can cry, scream, or beg," she said, addressing her parents one last time. "But nothing you do will stop me. I've made my choice." With that, she pushed the doors open and stepped outside, her figure radiant against the golden light of the setting sun. Inside, Mrs. Lee collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mrs. Lee, what have we done?" she whispered. Mr. Lee stood silently, his fists clenched at his sides, unable to meet his wife's tearful gaze. Wyden, now standing outside, took a deep breath. Her heart might be a chaotic storm of emotions, but her resolve was clear. The grand hall was eerily quiet, save for the murmurs of the media scattered discreetly among the limited number of attendees. The venue was lavishly decorated with white roses and cascading crystals, their sparkle matching the air of tension and curiosity surrounding the event. Everyone turned to look at the doors at the end of the aisle creaked open. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing the vision that was why, and she walked in alone, her head held high and her steps steady. The soft rustle of her elegant gown echoed in the hall, her confidence filling the void left by the absence of anyone escorting her. The whispers among the media grew louder. Reporter 1, is she walking alone? Where's her father or anyone from the family? Reporter 2, it's odd, but look at her. She's breathtaking. No wonder he chose her. Dressed in an ivory gown that fit her like it was crafted by angels, Wai-in was a picture of grace and beauty. The diamond necklace adorning her neck sparkled, but it was the fire in her eyes that truly mesmerized. Her makeup was subtle, her lips painted a soft red that matched the rose in her bouquet. At the other end of the aisle, Taehyung stood waiting, and the sight of her took his breath away. Taehyung, dressed in a custom black tuxedo with a deep navy silk tie, looked like a dream himself. His broad shoulders and sharp features made him the epitome of a perfect groom. But for the first time, he seemed to falter. As Wai-in walked closer, Taehyung's lips parted, his breath caught in his throat. His dark, almond-shaped eyes softened, gazing at her like she was the only person in the world. Taehyung to himself, beautiful doesn't even begin to describe her. I imagined her looking stunning, but this is beyond anything I could have dreamed of. Wai-in's gaze met his, and for a fleeting second, the world around them seemed to blur. It was just the two of them. As Wai-in reached the end of the aisle, Taehyung instinctively extended his hand. His long fingers trembled slightly, betraying his otherwise composed demeanor. Taehyung, you're breathtaking, he murmured, his voice barely audible to anyone but her. Wai-in placed her hand in his, her fingers delicate yet firm. Their touch sent an electric charge through both of them, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing between them. Taehyung guided her up the small stage, his hand never leaving hers. The priest stood waiting, though he seemed slightly nervous under the heavy aura of the moment. The priest cleared his throat. We are gathered here today to witness the union of KIMTAEHYUNG and Wai-in Lee in holy matrimony. The ceremony began, and the vows came next. Taehyung's deep, resonant voice filled the space as he looked directly into Wai-in's eyes. Taehyung, Wai-in, from the moment I saw you, you became my obsession. You're stubborn, reckless, and a complete handful. He smirked slightly, eliciting a quiet chuckle from the crowd. But you're also brave, brilliant, and maddeningly beautiful. Today, I vow to protect you, to stand by your side, and to make you mine forever because that's where you belong, with me, forever. Taehyung, Wai-in, from the moment I saw you, you became my obsession. You're stubborn, reckless, and a complete handful. He smirked slightly, eliciting a quiet chuckle from the crowd. But you're also brave, brilliant, and maddeningly beautiful. Today, I vow to protect you, to stand by your side, and to make you mine forever because that's where you belong, with me, forever. Wai-in's heart skipped a beat. The way he spoke made it sound like a declaration, not just a vow. The priest turned to her, and Wai-in took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice was steady, though there was an undeniable fire behind it. Why then, Taehyung, you are the most infuriating man I have ever met. You're arrogant, possessive, and utterly impossible to deal with. She paused, letting a faint smirk play on her lips. But you're also the man I've chosen. So today, I vow to face every storm with you, to challenge you when you're wrong, and to stand by you when you're right. And I vow to never let anyone come between us no matter what. Her words hung in the air, each one laced with unspoken promises and emotions. The priest nodded and moved to the rings. Taehyung took the diamond-encrusted band from Juwon, sliding it onto Yin's finger with deliberate slowness, his touch lingering. Taehyung, with this ring, I claim you as mine. Yin picked up the matching ring for him, sliding it onto his finger without breaking eye contact. Yin, and with this ring, I promise to be yours. The priest smiled nervously, sensing the intensity between them. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Taehyung stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Yin. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. Taehyung, mine, he whispered before leaning in. The kiss was slow and deliberate, full of possession and passion, sealing their union in front of everyone present. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment that would soon dominate every headline. As they pulled apart, Yin's lips curled into the faintest of smirks, and Taehyung's hand slid protectively around her waist. Taehyung, let's show the world, Mrs. Kim, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. Yin, let's, she replied, her tone matching his. The newlyweds turned to face the crowd, a storm of emotions brewing behind their perfect smiles. Their journey had just begun. The ceremony had ended, and the time had come for the bride to leave her family home. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and unspoken emotions as Yin stood near the sleek black limousine waiting for her. She didn't glance back, her expression calm but distant, as if she had already severed the ties that bound her to the people behind her. Mrs. Lee, however, couldn't hold back any longer. Her maternal instincts took over as she hurried to Taehyung, who was casually slipping on his coat, looking every bit the untouchable CEO. Mrs. Lee, Taehyung, please. Please, take care of her. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. She's my only daughter, ... I know she's stubborn and impulsive, but please don't hurt her. Taehyung paused, turning to face her. His gaze was unreadable, his lips curling into a faint smirk. Taehyung, hurt her, mother-in-law? His tone was almost mocking, yet dangerously calm. I would never hurt her. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. She's mine now, and I don't destroy what belongs to me. Mrs. Lee's tears only fell harder, her hands clasped together in a silent plea. Juwon stepped in nervously, sensing the growing unease. Juwon, Taehyung ... about the contract? Taehyung's smirk deepened as he turned his attention to Juwon, adjusting his cufflinks with calculated ease. Taehyung, yes, the contract, tomorrow, 10 a.m. in my office. Juwon, yeah, sure. Of course, why not? His laugh was forced, his discomfort evident. It's the company you care about, after all. Taehyung, exactly. His tone was laced with sarcasm, though his eyes betrayed no humor. Meanwhile, Yin, standing near the car, hadn't spared a glance at her parents. Her posture was stiff, her chin held high as she ignored the emotional chaos behind her. Without waiting for Taehyung or offering any parting words, she opened the car door herself and got in. Mrs. Lee, Yin. She called out, but Yin didn't respond, didn't even look back. Taehyung, noticing her departure, chuckled softly under his breath and turned back to Mrs. Lee one last time. Taehyung, well, mother-in-law, it seems she's as eager to leave as I am to take her. He gave her a mockingly polite nod and walked toward the car. As he approached, his guards swiftly moved to ensure no one followed. Taehyung opened the car door and slid in next to Yin, who stared out the window, her expression unreadable. The engine roared to life, and the limousine began to move. The flash of cameras from the media outside was relentless, capturing every second of their departure. Inside the car, Taehyung glanced at Yin, his lips curving into a smirk. Taehyung, you didn't even say goodbye. How heartless of you, Mrs. Kim. Yin finally turned to face him, her eyes cold and unflinching. Yin, goodbyes are for people I care about. Taehyung chuckled, leaning back in his seat, clearly amused by her defiance. Taehyung, you're going to make this marriage very interesting, aren't you? Widen didn't respond, her gaze returning to the window as the city lights blurred past. The convoy of cars, flanked by Taehyung's guards, drove away into the night, leaving behind a family in tears and a storm of emotions. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Lee collapsed into a chair, her sobs filling the room. Mrs. Lee, what have we done? What if he destroys her? What if she's never happy again? Juan placed a hesitant hand on her shoulder, unable to find the words to console her. Meanwhile, Soha stood in the corner, her arms crossed, her face dark with anger and regret. Soha, this is your doing, she hissed. If you had listened to me 2 years ago, none of this would have happened. But none of their words mattered now. Wai-in was gone, and her new life with Taehyung had begun, a life that promised to be anything but ordinary. Taehyung adjusted the cuffs of his pristine white shirt as he stepped into the grand bedroom. The air was thick with the scent of roses and jasmine, a faint reminder of the wedding earlier. His phone call had dragged on longer than expected, leaving his new bride waiting alone. He had instructed the maids to assist her, but stepping into the room, he frowned when he noticed it was completely dark. Taehyung, what the? He muttered, flicking on the lights. As the room illuminated, his breath hitched momentarily. There she was, sitting cross-legged on the bed, her back against the intricately carved headboard, holding a knife in one hand and an apple in the other. Her sharp features were bathed in the golden glow of the lights, her expression calm but oddly unsettling. Taehyung, you changed. His voice held a note of curiosity as his eyes roamed over her figure. Why were you looking forward to removing it yourself? She quipped, her tone sharp yet teasing. Taehyung chuckled, running a hand through his hair. Taehyung, I wouldn't have minded. He walked toward the bed, unbuttoning his sleeves, and sat beside her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes keenly observing her. Widen leaned her head back against the headboard, her gaze distant. Taehyung, are you hungry? Widen? Yes. Taehyung, what do you want? I can call the maids. Widen. Blood. Taehyung froze, his brow furrowing as he turned to face her. Taehyung, what? Widen's lips curled into a faint smirk, her eyes gleaming mischievously. Widen, that too, yours. Taehyung bit his lower lip, leaning back slightly as he looked at her with an amused expression. Suddenly, he reached forward, gripping her ankle and pulling her down flat on the bed. Widen gasped as he hovered over her, his face mere inches from hers. Taehyung, drink it then, he whispered, his voice low and provocative. But Widen was quick. She pushed him off, flipping their positions as she straddled him. Her movements were swift, and before he could react, the knife was at his throat. Widen, I won't mind. Taehyung's dark eyes locked with hers, a smirk playing on his lips despite the blade pressing against his skin. Taehyung, may I know the reason for this? He asked, his tone mockingly calm. Widen, why did you marry her? Her voice was firm, her eyes narrowing. Taehyung's smirk faltered for a split second before returning. Taehyung, I thought you were going to ask why I killed her. Something hidden. Widen pressed the KN fit closer, her voice cold. Widen, answer me. Taehyung sighed dramatically, his eyes rolling. Taehyung, long story, darling. I'll tell you later. Shall we focus on the wedding night instead? His tone turned innocent, his smirk teasing. Widen raised an eyebrow. Widen, eager, aren't we? Taehyung, can't help it. You're too hot to resist. Widen's expression darkened, her voice dropping. Widen, how was your first wedding night? Taehyung blinked, the question catching him off guard. Taehyung, I had a good time. Why? Anne's grip on the KN tightened as she traced it along his jawline. Widen, was she good? Taehyung frowned, his playful demeanor slipping. Taehyung, what? Wifey, I had a good time in my study ... with my files. Whoever you're talking about doesn't exist in that sense. Widen's eyes searched his for any hint of a lie. Taehyung, I swear. After a tense moment, Widen threw the KN Fizz sighed and grabbed his collar with both hands, pulling him close. Wyan, I don't care what you did with your first wife. I am your wife now, and I will be the last. Her voice was possessive, her gaze fierce. Taehyung's lips twitched into a genuine smile. Taehyung, no doubt, honey. Yn, if you ever tried to cheat, then I will ... double quote. She trailed off, her voice trembling with emotion. Taehyung tilted his head, his smirk returning. Taehyung, you will what? Yn, I will do something. Taehyung, do something? Like what? Oh ... like what you did to Jiha. Yn's eyes widened, her breath hitching. Yn, what? In an instant, Taehyung flipped them over, pinning her wrists above her head. His face was dangerously close to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Taehyung, I remember everything that happened. That night, his tone was low and menacing, each word emphasized. Yn swallowed hard, her heart pounding. Yn, did you marry me to take revenge for your first wife? Taehyung's lips curled into a wicked smile. Taehyung, no, I married you to take revenge for leaving me after such a hard work. Why? Anne's breath hitched as Taehyung leaned closer, his gaze dark and intense. Taehyung, we both aren't V, RG, and S because of you, my wildcat. But it's not cool because I wasn't in my senses that night. Now, I'll make sure you're out of your senses tonight. Before she could respond, his lips crashed onto hers in a KSS that was rough, passionate, and all-consuming. Yn resisted at first, her body tense beneath his, but his fervor was undeniable. His hands roamed, pulling her closer, claiming her as his. Yn found herself lost in the intensity, her hands gripping his shirt tightly as the kiss deepened. His touch was demanding, leaving no room for protest as he made his intentions clear. Taehyung, tonight, there are no boundaries, no pasts, no regrets, he murmured against her lips, his voice a mixture of desire and dominance. Yn's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, her possessiveness and passion matching his as they continued their wedding night, the room filled with the heat of their undeniable chemistry and the lingering promise of a love-hate relationship that had only just begun. I don't know what I did, but if you want a bonus, show me 50+ comments and 100 likes. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll think about it. How's that? I don't know what I did, but if you want a bonus, show me 50+ comments and 100 likes. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll think about it. How's that?